Hi, I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and we're excited to be here today talking to Derek Manky, Chief of Security Insights and Global Threat Alliances at Fortinet's FortiGuard Labs, talking about combating evolving cyber threats from the network and out to the edge. Derek, thank you so much for joining us today.
Wyatt, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
I know there's a lot we can cover, but let me start by asking, as organizations evolve their networks, cyber criminals are clearly adapting their attack tactics to take greater advantage of fragmented perimeters, siloed teams, and a larger attack surface. So, Derek, maybe we could start by, can you share your insights into how cyber adversaries are using pre-attack reconnaissance to increase and then maximize attacks like ransomware?
Sure, Wyatt. This is a concerning trend we're already starting to see, but this is, I fully expect this to be in full swing next year and even following. This is just what is to come and what we're up against. If we look at what's happening with cybercrime, this has been a result of the snowball effect, I call it, 10 years plus of profiting and getting deep pockets, just like APT groups. So, we're calling this APC, Advanced Persistent Cybercrime, because that's exactly what it is. We're used to the world of APTs. That name is a household name, which is, nation state targeted attacks. Most people think, I'm not impacted by that directly because I'm not in their targets. We're starting to see that with cybercrime now, right? And what advanced persistent is all about is spending more time on the left-hand side of the attack. So doing reconnaissance, blueprinting networks, understanding services and ports that are open and applications that are running and all those sorts of things, and the people behind them, right? And that's all part of the reconnaissance. And then the weaponization phase also, that's pre-attack, right? So it's not just reconnaissance, but also building weapons. So we're talking about exploits, we're talking about malware, custom malware that's being written also to run on various platforms, including systems, or let's say networks like OT, operational technology, critical infrastructure, healthcare, enterprise as well. There's a lot of targets there, and the concerning part here is the effectiveness and the risk goes up a lot, because we're talking about a shift from the volumetric attacks to much more premeditated attacks with higher risk, going after key critical systems and monetizing that. That's the key difference from APTs.
Well, recently, I'm aware FortiGuard Labs published some new findings that indicate cyber criminals are expanding their attacks further outside of the extended network, if you will. Can you elaborate more on what that looks like and what leaders need to do about that?
Yeah, so first of all, we always talk about the attack surface expanding, and it continues to. It's exploding, in fact. That started with the rise of IoT devices, but now we're seeing just much more endpoint devices. Linux is a big component of that too. Why, Linux is actually running, and a lot of people may not know this, but it's running on Windows now, on new versions of Windows 10 and Windows 11. It has something called the Windows subsystem for Linux. And so right there, that means that at the endpoint level, if we look at the systems themselves, there's just much more code running, and we're seeing the cyber criminals writing, attack code for those systems and malware. Mirai botnet's a great example of that. It was our #1 threat that we put in our threat landscape report from FortiGuard Labs. So that's at the endpoint level. Now, if you look at what's happening, is starting to go to the edge, right? We're seeing things like edge access Trojans for Linux being written, so infecting these edge devices, and that edge is literally being pushed out to space now. There's over 4,000 LEO, low Earth orbital satellites. Starlink, as an example, has plans to have 30,000 of these in place in the coming years. There's competition also arising in that space. So what it boils down to is that from point A to point B, there's going to be no such thing as no connection in the future. And that includes things in rugged terrain, as an example, OT, critical infrastructure devices that are literally going to be opened to, on a network level to cyber criminals. So that's what we mean. The attack is pushing to space, right? These are still using ground stations from point A to point B, using the satellite as obviously the relay point. But it's really not just the attack surface, but the flow of traffic is going to be exponential as well.
That sounds like a somewhat disturbing development that certainly keep an eye on, but an example of how all this is spreading to the edge. So talk a little more about what else does your research indicate on the security risks at the network edge?
Yeah, so we're used, well, when I say we, the industry, if you look at the way security has stacked up over the decades, it started with just PC and endpoint and Windows, of course, and to all of these, as threats evolved to the smartphone and mobile and IoT, security had to shore up against that. And edge is the next target. So it's a natural evolution for that. If we look at those edge devices again, the problem with that, Wyatt, is that they have a lot of privilege, right? These devices are often used for automation, even with AI and machine learning purposes, making their own, they're empowered to make their own decisions. And they act on protocol, on APIs and integration and processes. And that is great from a operational and convenience standpoint, but as always, convenience and complexity is the enemy of security. And so this is a problem when these devices can become infected, and that is the security implication here. We're starting to see custom malware, again, going back to Linux, being written on Linux that can infect these devices, turn them into botnets. And the problem about that is they have a lot of power, the cyber criminals do, when they infect these. We're referring to these as EATs, edge access Trojans as well. And the other problem is this whole network. They're commoditizing this as well. They're putting this onto the dark web, expanding their CAAS, the crime as a service portfolio on their end. Because again, if we think about advanced persistent cybercrime, this used to be available only to a handful of organizations, the capability to attack these systems. Now, through a CAAS model, they're giving this access for a price, of course, to a much wider cyber criminal base, which is a big problem. So it's a scalability thing. They're really shoring up their scalability to launch these attacks.
Well, in light of that, Derek, so as we learn more about these newer risks and how they're evolving, what should IT leaders be thinking about in terms of shoring up their cybersecurity defenses and taking other measures to reduce their risks?
Yeah, so we live in a new era now, right? I mean, if you think about everything that's happened over the last couple of years with work from anywhere, and we talked about that edge pushing out to all these environments and, networks converging that should be segmented, but in reality, a lot of them are not. We're seeing that just even with attacks now on crypto, as an example, going back to that application layer. So it's another example. We're seeing attacks infect systems to hunt for crypto wallets, right? To be able to, that's a monetization technique on their end. What that means is there's more malicious code being targeted for these devices that are outside of the corporate core. And so when we look at organizations, what they need to do, first of all, I always like to approach this from a people, process, technology. Of course, there's a lot of meat underneath that. But first of all, the people, right? There's a lot of good things that can be done to safeguard against these. A lot of these attacks that are rising, to be able to understand the cyber hygiene aspect, do education like we have with our NSE program and InfoSec and awareness program, FortiGuard Labs as an example. That's all really key to strengthen that chain. Just like cyber criminals are spending more time on their reconnaissance and their premeditated attacks, the proactive measure on their end, we need to do that on our side too. That's very important. From a process standpoint, it's the same thing, enforcing things like, honing those skills, changing password management. So changing passwords all of the time effectively on a schedule, doing multi-factor authentication as an example. And then from a technology perspective, the good news is there's a lot of technology. Again, we didn't just think this up overnight. There's a lot of technology that exists to be able to combat this, because we're talking about the weaponization of AI on the cyber criminals end. So you need effective AI technology on the defense side, right? Effectively, you need to fight the fire with fire. It's very important. Things like zero trust network access, we've talked about that, is really important, especially in today's new era. And of course, tying this all together. There's a lot of components in play. So you absolutely need integration, integrated mesh architecture like our security fabric is really important as well.
Well, Derek Manky, thank you so much for joining us and sharing some of your observations and insights and some details about this new report. And we also want to thank our audience for tuning in today.
Thanks so much.